She used to say that children are a mother's insurance policy against loneliness. In the end, she had no policy left to claim. The first time Mama Grace fainted, it happened in the kitchen. It was late afternoon in Surulere, the air thick with the smell of frying onions and exhaust fumes drifting in from the street. The ceiling fan clicked with each slow rotation. She had been stirring a pot of stew, her hand trembling slightly, the way it had been doing for months now. She told herself it was just age. Her eldest son, Femi, had called that morning. Or rather, he had sent a short voice note. "Morning, Mum. Busy day? I'll call later." He hadn't called later. She replayed the voice note twice while slicing tomatoes, smiling at the sound of his hurried voice. He always sounded important now. Always rushing somewhere. Always managing something. Her daughter, Ronke, hadn't called in 3 weeks. Mama Grace never counted days out loud, but she counted them. The dizziness came suddenly. The wooden spoon slipped from her hand, splashing red stew across the tiled floor. The room tilted. The fan above her head seemed to spin faster. She tried to hold onto the counter. Her knees gave way first. When she hit the floor, the pot tipped over beside her. Hot stew spread across the tiles, soaking into the hem of her wrapper. She didn't scream. She only whispered, "Jésus!" Outside, a motorcycle roared past. Somewhere down the street, children laughed. Inside the house, there was no one. It was the neighbour's teenage daughter who found her. The girl had come to return a borrowed bowl and knocked twice before pushing the door open. "Auntie Grace!" The girl's voice cracked when she saw her lying there. The hospital smelled of disinfectant and boiled rice. Mama Grace hated hospitals. The white walls made her feel small, as if she had already been erased. The doctor spoke gently, but his words landed like stones. "Severe anemia. Possible internal complications. We need to run more tests." She nodded as if she understood everything. She didn't. Her hands lay on the thin hospital blanket, veins raised like blue lines under fragile skin. She kept glancing toward the door, expecting one of her children to walk in. They did come, but not together. Femi arrived first, wearing a neatly pressed shirt, his phone glued to his palm. He smelled faintly of cologne and impatience. "Mum, what is this I'm hearing?" he asked, forcing a smile. She reached for his hand, her fingers light against his. "I'm fine. Just small weakness." He looked around the ward as if calculating the cost of the oxygen in the room. Ronke came later that evening, heels clicking loudly against the hospital tiles. She stood at the foot of the bed, her handbag hanging stiffly from her shoulder. "Mummy, you should have told us you were this bad." Mama Grace blinked at her. "I didn't want to disturb you." The silence that followed felt heavier than any diagnosis. The doctor asked to speak with them outside. Through the thin curtain, Mama Grace could hear low voices. Long-term treatment, regular blood transfusions, possible surgery, expenses. She closed her eyes. When they came back in, their faces were different. Not cruel, not angry, just distant. Femi sat down and cleared his throat. "Mum, the doctor is saying this might take time." Ronke crossed her arms. "And money." Mama Grace looked at both of them. She wanted to apologize for being sick, for becoming a burden, for aging without permission. "I can manage," she said softly. "I don't need much." But something had already shifted in the room. Femi checked his phone again. Ronke glanced at her watch. That night, after they left, Mama Grace lay awake listening to the slow beeping of a machine beside another patient's bed. The ward lights dimmed. A nurse adjusted her drip. She remembered the night she stayed awake when Femi had malaria at 7. The way she had pressed cold cloth to his forehead until morning. The way she had sold her gold earrings to pay Ronki's university fees. She remembered carrying both of them on her back at different times, literally and emotionally. Now her body felt light, too light. The next morning, Femi sent a message instead of coming. Have a meeting. We'll try to visit tomorrow. Ronki didn't send anything. Mama Grace stared at the door again. It remained closed. That was the day she overheard them talking outside her hospital room. Not about her recovery, not about her comfort, but about options. And as their voices lowered into something colder than fear, Mama Grace realized, with a slow, painful clarity, that her illness was no longer the biggest problem in their lives. She was. The word options lingered in Mama Grace's mind long after their footsteps faded down the corridor. Options? She had always used that word differently. Options meant adding pepper instead of crayfish when money was tight. It meant walking instead of taking a bus. It meant adjusting, never abandoning. But the way Femi said it outside her hospital door sounded like subtraction. That afternoon, the doctor returned with a clipboard tucked under his arm. He spoke gently again, but there was firmness in his tone now. Madam Grace, your children need to decide how to proceed. The earlier we start treatment, the better. She nodded. They need to decide. The nurse helped her sit up. Her head felt heavy, like it was filled with wet cotton. The bedsheet scratched softly against her skin. Her phone lay on the small table beside her. It had not vibrated all day. By evening, Femi arrived. Alone. He didn't sit immediately. He stood near the window, looking outside at the fading orange sky. Mum, he began, rubbing the back of his neck. You know things are not easy right now? She smiled faintly. Things have never been easy. He didn't smile back. There are hospital bills already, and the doctor is saying this might be long term. I wasn't prepared. Prepared. She studied his face, the faint crease between his brows, the slight impatience in his breathing. He looked tired, but not from grief, from inconvenience. Ronki walked in a few minutes later, her perfume sharp and unfamiliar in the sterile room. She didn't hug her mother. Instead, she placed a file on the small table. Mummy, we've been talking. Mama Grace's fingers tightened around the blanket. Talking. There's a place, Ronka continued carefully. A care facility. They specialize in elderly patients with chronic conditions. The room went very quiet. Even the machine beside the other patient seemed to pause. A home, Femi clarified quickly. A very good one. Nurses, doctors, everything. Mama Grace blinked slowly. A home. Ronka's lips pressed into a thin line. It would be better than this hospital. And you won't be alone. Won't be alone. Mama Grace felt something inside her crack. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a thin, quiet fracture. I have a home, she whispered. Femi exhaled sharply. Mum, that house is old. The stairs are dangerous. Who will stay with you? Ronki travels. I work late. It's not practical. Not practical. The words settled like dust over her chest. She thought of the house in Zurulere, the faded curtains she had sewn herself, the dent on the kitchen wall where Femi had thrown a ball at age 9. The small mango tree Ronki planted in secondary school. Not practical. I won't disturb you, she said gently. I can manage in my house. Just small help sometimes. Ronka's voice grew firmer. It's not about disturbance. It's about responsibility. Responsibility, Mama Grace swallowed. I carried responsibility when your father died, she said softly. I worked in that tailoring shop from morning till night. I didn't send you away because you were expensive. The word surprised even her. Femi looked uncomfortable. That's different. How? She asked. Silence. Outside, a trolley squeaked down the corridor. Someone coughed in another ward. Femi finally spoke. We're not abandoning you, Mum. It's temporary, just until things stabilize. Oh, temporary. She looked from one face to the other, searching for softness, for hesitation. She found calculation. Ronki avoided her eyes. You already decided, Mama Grace said quietly. Neither of them denied it. 2 days later, the discharge papers were signed. The car ride was painfully quiet. Mama Grace sat in the back seat, her small bag resting on her lap. She had packed only 2 wrappers, a Bible and an old photo album. She kept expecting them to turn towards Surulere. They didn't. The facility stood on the outskirts of town, behind a tall gate with peeling paint. The building was clean but impersonal. Rows of windows, no laughter, no familiar smells. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and something else. Resignation. A nurse with tired eyes took her bag. Welcome, Mama, the nurse said kindly. Femi avoided looking at her as he filled out forms. Ronki checked her phone. When it was time to leave, Mama Grace reached for Femi's hand again. He hugged her quickly, his body already angled toward the door. We'll visit, he promised. Ronki kissed her cheek lightly. Don't worry too much, Mummy. Then they were gone. Mama Grace stood by the small window of her new room and watched their car drive out through the gate. It did not slow down. That night, she lay on a narrow bed that did not creak the way hers did at home. There were no street sounds she recognized. No neighbor's radio, no smell of frying onions. Just quiet. A different kind of quiet. In the bed beside her, another elderly woman whispered into the darkness. Did they say when they're coming back? Mama Grace stared at the ceiling. Yes, she answered after a long pause. But even as she said it, she realized something was wrong, because her children had not given a date. And deep in her chest, beneath the weakness and the anemia and the fragile bones, she felt the slow, unmistakable beginning of something far more dangerous than illness. She felt herself becoming forgotten. The first week passed with polite lies. They will come this weekend. They are busy. They called yesterday. Mama Grace repeated those sentences to herself like quiet prayers. She said them to the woman in the next bed, Mrs. Durajaye, whose children had not visited in 8 months. She said them to the nurses when they asked gently, Any family coming today? Each time she said it, her voice grew thinner. The facility operated on routine. Wake up at 6, medication at 7, breakfast at 8. The television stayed on all day in the common room, always too loud, always showing things that had nothing to do with the people watching. Mama Grace moved slowly now. Her body felt like it belonged to someone older than her 72 years. She walked with small, careful steps, her slippers dragging softly against the tiled floor. Sometimes she would pause mid-step, as if she had forgotten where she was going, not because of memory, because of longing. So, on Wednesday, she sat near the window in the common room, her photo album resting on her lap. She traced a faded picture of Femi in his graduation gown. His smile had been wide then, proud and boyish. She remembered sewing his first school uniform by hand because she could not afford the ready-made one. She remembered staying awake until 2 a.m. to finish a customer's dress Just to pay his exam fees. A nurse walked past. Beautiful family, the nurse said kindly. Yes, Mama Grace replied. Her finger lingered on the photo a little too long. By Friday afternoon, she began to sit straighter whenever she heard a car engine outside the gate. The other residents noticed. They'll come, Mrs. Durajaya said gently. Mama Grace nodded. They promised. Saturday arrived with bright sunlight that poured through the barred windows. The security guard opened the gate several times that morning. Visitors arriving with food flasks and plastic bags. Laughter echoing in the courtyard. Mama Grace smoothed her wrapper carefully. She adjusted her headscarf twice. Every time footsteps approached, her heart jumped. Every time they passed her room, something inside her sank lower. By 3 p.m., the courtyard was almost empty again. Mrs. Durajaya's son came. He brought oranges and sat beside his mother, holding her hand the entire time. They argued about small things, about salt in the food, about politics. But there was warmth in their voices. Mama Grace watched from her doorway. She kept her face neutral. By evening, the sunlight thinned into grey. Her phone lay on the small table beside her bed. No missed calls. She picked it up once, then twice. She even checked if it was switched off. It wasn't. She told herself maybe Femi's meeting ran late. Maybe Ronki's car had a problem. She told herself many maybes. By nightfall, the security guard locked the gate. Mama Grace sat on her bed without turning on the light. The room felt smaller than before. Mrs. Durajaya cleared her throat softly. They didn't come. Mama Grace swallowed. Maybe tomorrow. Sunday morning came with rain. Heavy, insistent rain that beat against the metal roofing and blurred the outside world into streaks of grey. No one visited on rainy days. The staff moved slower. The building smelled damp. Mama Grace didn't bother sitting near the window. She lay on her side, facing the wall. Around noon, her phone vibrated. Her heart raced so suddenly she felt dizzy. She fumbled to answer it. It was Ronka. Mummy! Her daughter's voice sounded rushed. Sorry, this weekend was hectic. We'll try next week. Mama Grace opened her mouth to say something. Anything. But Ronka continued. And Mummy, the facility fees? They said it's due tomorrow. Femi transferred some, but it's not complete. Just manage them small, okay? We're sorting things out. Manage them small. As if she was the one negotiating her own stay. The line went silent. Ronki had already ended the call. Mama Grace kept the phone pressed to her ear long after the dial tone faded. In the hallway, someone began coughing violently. A nurse hurried past. Mama Grace slowly lowered the phone and stared at her reflection in the dark screen. Her face looked smaller, older. Something inside her finally shifted. Not breaking this time, but hardening. That evening, she asked the head nurse for a pen and paper. I want to write something, she said quietly. Huh? The nurse smiled. A letter. Mama Grace nodded. She sat at the small desk by the window and began to write. Her handwriting trembled at first, but it grew steadier with each line. She did not write about money. She did not write about pain. She wrote about memory, about the mango tree in Surulere, about Femi's childhood asthma, about Ronke's fear of thunderstorms. She wrote until the rain stopped. When she finished, she folded the paper carefully and placed it inside her Bible. Not in an envelope, not addressed, just waiting. That night, long after the lights were turned off, Mama Grace lay awake again. But this time, she wasn't listening for footsteps. She was listening to something else. a decision forming quietly in the space her children had left behind. And somewhere deep in her fragile chest, beneath the weakness and disappointment, a different kind of strength began to gather, the kind that only comes when a mother realizes she has nothing left to lose. And by morning, the nurse would discover something in Mama Grace's room that would change everything. The nurse found the bed empty. At first, she thought Mama Grace had gone to the bathroom. The slippers were not beside the bed. The Bible was gone from the small table. The thin hospital blanket had been folded neatly, too neatly. The window was slightly open. The early morning air carried the smell of wet earth from the night's rain. "Mama Grace," the nurse called softly. No answer. Within minutes, the facility stirred into panic. Staff checked the compound, the dining hall, the medication room. The security guards swore the gate had remained locked through the night, but someone had opened it at dawn. The CCTV camera at the entrance had not been working for weeks. By 8 a.m., Femi's phone rang. He was in a meeting when he stepped outside to answer it. The sun was already high, heat pressing against his forehead. "Sir," the administrator said carefully, "your mother is not in her room." He frowned. "What do you mean, not in her room?" "She appears to have left early this morning." "Left!" The word felt ridiculous. "She's weak," he snapped. "Where would she go?" "That is what we are trying to determine." Ronki arrived at the facility first, her car braking sharply at the gate. Femi followed shortly after, irritation written clearly across his face. "This is negligence," Ronka said, pacing. "You can't just let a sick old woman walk out." The administrator remained calm. "She packed her belongings. It does not appear she was confused." Femi rubbed his temple. "Did she say anything to anyone?" The nurse hesitated. "She asked for paper yesterday. She was writing." Ronka's chest tightened. "No, writing what?" The nurse handed over the folded sheet that had been left on the desk. "And not the letter inside the Bible." Another one. This one was short. Femi unfolded it with stiff fingers. "My children, do not look for me in places where love has already left. I do not want to be a bill you have to calculate. I have remembered who I was before I became your responsibility. Take care of yourselves." Mama Ronki's throat went dry. "She's dramatic," Femi muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Inside him, something uncomfortable stirred. They drove straight to Surulere. The old house stood quiet behind its faded gate. The mango tree had grown wider, branches stretching over the cracked concrete. The front door was locked. Ronki peered through the window. Dust rested on the furniture. Nothing had been touched. "She's not here," she whispered. Femi felt a flicker of unease now. Not irritation, not inconvenience. Something colder. They checked neighbors' houses, the church nearby, the tailoring shop she once worked in, now owned by someone else. No one had seen her. By afternoon, the sun felt merciless. Ronki's mascara had begun to smudge at the corners of her eyes. "Maybe she collapsed somewhere," she said suddenly. The image hit them both at once. Mama Grace, alone on a roadside, weak, invisible. Femi swallowed hard. They returned to the facility, demanding more answers. It was Mrs. Durajaye who spoke quietly from her bed. "She told me something last night." Ronka turned sharply. "What?" "She said she forgot herself." Silence. Mrs. Durajaye continued, her voice thin but steady. "She said when a mother becomes a burden, she must remember she was a woman first." Femi felt heat rise to his face. Ronke looked away. That evening, Femi called the police. The missing person report felt surreal. Height, 5 feet 4 inches. Weight, under 60 kilograms. Last seen wearing a faded purple wrapper and grey shawl. Health condition, unstable. The officer asked routine questions. Any recent arguments? Femi hesitated. No. Ronka's eyes flickered toward him, but the truth hung between them like humidity. By nightfall, guilt began to settle in. Not loudly, quietly, in the pauses between their sentences, in the way Ronka kept replaying her last phone call. Just manage them small. Okay? She felt the words pressing against her chest. Femi sat in his car outside the facility long after Ronka had left. He stared at the steering wheel, remembering something he had buried years ago. The day his father died. He had been 16. He had watched his mother stand still for only 5 minutes before wiping her tears and telling them, "We will not fall." She had never allowed them to feel the full weight of that loss. Now, he wondered when he had stopped seeing her as human. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered immediately. A calm female voice spoke. "Is this Mr. Femi Adeyemi?" "Yes." "I'm calling from General Hospital, Yaba." His heart slammed. "There is an elderly woman here. She gave your name before she lost consciousness." The world seemed to narrow into a single suffocating point. "Is she—" His voice cracked. "She is alive," the nurse said carefully. "But she was found collapsed near the bus terminal this afternoon." Collapsed? Near a bus terminal? Alone? Femi closed his eyes, and for the first time since all of this began, fear replaced pride. Real fear. Because now it was no longer about inconvenience. It was about the possibility that the last memory his mother carried was of being unwanted. And as he sped toward the hospital, one terrifying thought followed him the entire way. What if she had not meant to survive this time? By the time Femi and Ronka reached General Hospital in Yaba, the evening sky had turned the colour of ash. The emergency ward smelled sharp, antiseptic and metal, and something faintly sour beneath it. Nurses moved quickly, rubber soles squeaking against polished floors. Somewhere, a child cried. Somewhere else, a man groaned in pain. Femi gave his mother's name at the desk. His voice sounded unfamiliar to him. Smaller. They were led to a narrow room with a thin curtain pulled halfway across. Mama Grace lay on the bed, oxygen tubing resting beneath her nose. Her skin looked almost translucent under the fluorescent light. One arm was bruised where a needle had been inserted. Her wrapper was folded neatly on a chair, as if she had still been trying to be orderly. Ronki stopped walking. For a moment, she couldn't move closer. Femi stepped forward first. "Mum," he whispered. Her eyelids fluttered slightly, but they did not open. The doctor entered quietly. "She was found sitting on a bench near the bus terminal," he said. "She likely intended to travel somewhere. She collapsed before boarding any vehicle." "Where was she going?" Ronka asked. The doctor shook his head. "She didn't say." Femi felt something tightening in his chest. "She had very little money on her," the doctor continued. "Just enough for a short trip." Ronka's lips trembled. "Is she going to be okay?" The doctor paused too long. "She is very weak. Severe blood loss, dehydration, and—" He hesitated, lowering his voice. "Emotional stress can worsen these conditions." Emotional stress. The words seemed too gentle for what they meant. Femi sat beside the bed and took his mother's hand. It felt lighter than he remembered. He thought of the many times that hand had held his, crossing busy streets, guiding him into school gates, resting against his feverish forehead. Now it lay limp in his. "I'm here," he said. But the words felt late. Ronki slowly stepped forward. Her heels made a soft, uncertain sound on the floor. "Mummy!" Her voice cracked in a way it never had before. Mama Grace's eyes opened slightly. For a brief second, they focused. She looked at both of them. Not with anger, not with accusation, just tired recognition. Her lips parted. They leaned closer to hear her. "I didn't want," she whispered, each word thin and fragile, "to make you tired." Ronka broke first. "No, Mummy, please, don't say that." But Mama Grace's gaze drifted past them toward the ceiling. "I remembered I used to be strong." A single tear slid slowly from the corner of her eye. "I forgot myself." Her breathing grew uneven. The monitor beside her began to beep in a slower rhythm. The doctor moved quickly. Nurses entered. There were instructions, urgent movements, controlled voices. Femi and Ronki were gently guided out of the room. The curtain closed. Through the thin fabric, they could see shadows. Hands moving, equipment shifting. Ronki pressed her back against the wall and slid down to the floor, her face buried in her palms. Femi stood frozen. In his mind, memories rushed in violently. His mother laughing in the kitchen, scolding him gently for breaking a plate. Sitting proudly at his graduation ceremony in a dress she had sewn herself. He had always assumed she would remain there in the background of his life. Stable, available, unbreakable. No one prepares you for the moment you realize your mother is human. And breakable. The beeping sound changed, then flattened. There was a stillness that felt heavier than sound. The doctor stepped out first. His face said everything before his mouth did. "I'm sorry." The hallway seemed to tilt. Ronki's cry tore through the quiet ward. Raw and unfiltered. Femi didn't cry immediately. He simply stared at the curtain as if waiting for someone to correct the mistake. But no one did. Later that night, they were given her belongings in a small plastic bag. Her Bible, her faded photo album, and inside the Bible, the letter. Ronka unfolded it with trembling hands. "My children, I have loved you in ways you will never fully know. Not loudly, not perfectly, but completely. If I have become heavy in your lives, forgive me. I am not angry. I am only tired. Please water the mango tree." Mama Ronki sobbed harder at that line. Femi felt something collapse inside him. Water the mango tree. That was all she asked. No accusation, no blame. Just a quiet reminder of home. They buried her 3 days later. The house in Surulere felt emptier than it ever had. The mango tree stood tall in the yard, leaves rustling softly in the wind. Femi stood beneath it long after everyone had left. He held a small watering can in his hand. The soil around the tree was dry. He poured water slowly, watching it sink into the earth. For the first time in his life, he understood something terrible and irreversible. Love can survive poverty. It can survive sickness. It can survive distance. But it does not survive neglect. And as the water disappeared into the ground, Femi realized with unbearable clarity, the only person who had never abandoned him had died believing she was the burden. Thank you for listening. What is your view about this story? Let us know in the comment section. Kindly like, comment, and subscribe to our channel.